Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Hayes, and it is a Sunday night here in the Hayes household, and I thought that today we would spend a little time looking at some of the early years of the American Revolution, and I could spend a few moments looking at your textbook with you. I know that some of you have said that the reading can be a little difficult, a little challenging, so I thought if I took the book, which I have in front of me, and maybe went through it page by page, as you're reading I could be clarifying and maybe bringing out some more of the more important points, and this would be your opportunity to jot down any questions, maybe write down some notes in your notebook that go with the textbook, and I'll also be adding some other important information. So I'm very casual here, as you can see. I'm in my daughter's bedroom. This is where we have the computer, and it's kind of quiet. It's a bright green room. And it's Sunday the 11th of November, and you can see I have my very patriotic coffee mug here ready to go. So as I said, I'm going to just kind of talk to you through this little video, and hopefully won't take a lot longer than 10 minutes. So if you think about the American Revolution at this point, where we left off, I think, was the Lexington and Concord battles. It's important to understand that the colonists were really broken into three different groups, and we talked about that earlier. There were patriots, or the radicals. There were the loyalists, who were more conservative, and then there were the neutrals, who tended to be a little more moderate and didn't really lean one way or another until much later in the controversy. But initially, we talked about taxation without representation, the distance between the colonies and Great Britain, and we talked about mercantilism and the Navigation Acts. But ultimately, this revolution comes down to a very specific belief that the Englishmen were being denied their rights. And the rights of Englishmen as individuals were very important. And so this revolution is really about what a government can do for its citizens, and that's what the colonists wanted to create, was a government that was going to protect its citizens, their natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, versus what they had been doing all this time was really living for the rights of the crown and, you know, making sure that the king got what he needed, but he wasn't so concerned about their needs. So it's a shift between you know, the colonists working to make sure that the crown gets what they need versus what the government can do for its people, for its citizens. So that's going to be the focus. If you think about the people involved, since we're talking about, you know, the radicals, the patriots, some important you know, people we're going to be talking about will be obviously George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army, the Minutemen, who was chosen as the leader. He was a Virginian, so he was a Southerner, not a New Englander, which surprised many people because Boston tended to be the hotbed of controversy. So why not a New Englander? Why George Washington? Well, he proved himself in the French and Indian War, and he was the tallest man in a room. So he really commanded a great presence, and he believed in the cause to try to gain independence from Great Britain. You have in the Virginia area, too, Thomas Jefferson, who is not necessarily going to be a radical fighter. He's not going to be in the army, but he's going to serve as kind of like the intelligence of the revolution. And he will have so much to do with the Declaration of Independence. He too, as I said, was a Virginian. But in the New Englanders, we have Samuel Adams, John Adams, both very bright revolutionaries. John Adams, a lawyer and attorney. Samuel Adams, not an attorney, but definitely a political activist, and one who wants desperately to see independence from Great Britain. He got involved in some trade, and so as a trader and a merchant, he needed to work toward those ends. And Thomas Paine, he's another revolutionary from Great Britain, will write something called Common Sense, and we'll talk about that as well. So if you look at your textbook, and I've got mine right in front of me, right here. There it is. American Promise. If you start at about page 190, 191, there'll be a section there that says The War for America, 1775 to 1783. You could definitely read through the interesting introduction about Deborah Sampson, who actually was a woman who served as a colonial Minuteman, and she, kept her gender a secret for a long time. She titled herself, or her name was Robert Shirtliff, and she masqueraded as a man for many years, trying to play her part in the war. So that's just one great example of women in the war, although that was a little more unusual. Definitely, one important aspect. And we talked about African Americans trying to have the opportunity to gain their freedom, either by joining the British, who openly encouraged the slaves to desert their masters, or by joining the Continental Army and the state militias in order to fight alongside white Americans. So it was a toss-up there where they would end up as a result of this war. So if you look at page 193, they're talking about the Second Continental Congress. Remember, we talked about the First Continental Congress last week, and that was supposed to set up a response to the coercive acts. The Second Continental Congress is going to be a different sort of meeting. The delegates are now going to decide how do they fight this war, because Lexington and Concord had already taken place. So the Second Continental Congress still assembles in Philadelphia, but they do need to find a commander, who is going to be George Washington, and they also need to talk about how do they fight this war, where are they going to get money, what are some other options they have besides war, can they come up with some compromises, maybe to end the war quickly or to, get the king on their side. So the first page, page 193, talks about that. Talks about, enlisting George Washington as a commander. They also talk about Thomas Jefferson being delegated to create a draft of some sort of a declaration, maybe of independence or to take up arms. Nonetheless, there are, even within the delegates at the Second Continental Congress, you're going to have radicals like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams, and John Adams, but you're also going to have some moderates. They mention a man by the name of John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, who initially was in favor of independence and was a radical, now begins to soften a little and become a moderate, and is trying to come up with some ways that they can work out a compromise with the king. So I think if you look at the geography again, the New England colonies, especially Massachusetts, strongly radical. And as you move down through the colonies to the middle Atlantic states, to the southern, it starts to move from radical to maybe a little bit more neutral to almost conservative. So in the time that the Second Continental Congress is meeting, they create an army, they actually declare war, and begin to take on the major functions of a really legitimate government. And then if you flip to page 194, you could do a little reading about famous battle you all have heard of, Bunker Hill, or sometimes known as Breed's Hill, which was a complete disaster for the Continental Army and certainly gave them pause as to whether or not they could even think about fighting the Redcoats, the English, because this was going to be a very difficult thing. They were really not as prepared as they thought they could have been. Add to that a smallpox epidemic, and many people starting to feel that maybe reconciliation with Britain is the way to go. And you might read a little something on 195 called the Olive Branch Petition, which is really asking King George to look at some other suggestions for the colonies. The Olive Branch Petition is on page 195, and it really says that we will stay loyal to the king. We'll blame all of our problems on the Parliament and on the ministers of Parliament. King George III rejects it, and so reconciliation is out of the question. On page 195 and 196, a little bit about common sense, written by Thomas Paine, and again, trying to move the neutrals to the side of independence, to the radicals. He really advocates for strong independence from Great Britain. Common Sense is the most widely read pamphlet of its time. It sells over 150,000 copies in just a matter of weeks, and they are very strongly endorsing that the British and the colonies separate. So when we get to the point of talking about the Declaration of Independence, I think you'll see that Common Sense, this pamphlet written by Thomas Paine, is going to be instrumental in moving some of those neutrals or moderates to the side of the radicals. And then we're going to leave the Declaration of Independence, which is on 197, as kind of a separate area of discussion, because we want to take some time to really look at that document. It's a pretty important document. So I really haven't talked to you a lot about the battles yet. We'll do that at another time. But other than Bunker Hill, there aren't too many battles that you're going to need to know about, and hopefully as we do some more of these little videos, I'll be able to alert you to more important ones that would be good for you to know. But for now, that's about it. If you can read through to page 198, that would be terrific. And I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. And I hope that you have a good night. I hope this helps a little bit. And we will reconvene in class or on another video. I hope you have a great night. See ya.